Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel. And today I just wanted to talk about the books that I have read this week and go from there basically. And it's been a fun reading week. The difficulty with doing weekly reads I'm finding at the moment is because I'm reading a lot of Booker books. I'm trying to make sure that the weekly reads is also not just here are 4 Booker books I read this week, partly for my own sanity and partly because I think otherwise there's a lot of me just talking about the same 3 books endlessly. But anyway, so actually it's been quite fun because as a result, it's nudged me to read some other books outside of Booker ones, which I think has also kept me slightly more sane. So let's get started talking about some of these. Okay, so granted, 2 of the books I'm going to be talking about are from the Polari Prize, so it's another prize. It's another bit of required reading. But here's one that isn't on any of those, and I really greatly enjoyed. This is Her. I still don't know how to actually ever really say that, by Rachel Cattle. And so this is named after a PJ Harvey song. I love PJ Harvey, and actually the time I was reading this book, I was meant to be seeing her live, but couldn't for various reasons. So was just sort of reading this book, thinking about what could have been. But Rachel Cattle has written this really odd and kind of wild book that I just sort of found a lot to enjoy in, really. So essentially the core idea is the book it sort of features a young woman who's sort of trying to work out who she is in the world, and both as sort of as a woman, but also as an artist or as a kind of creative person. And the book has her sort of looking at 2 of her heroines. How do I even say that word anymore? How do words work? And one of those being PJ Harvey, and the other being the experimental thinker and writer Anne Quinn. And so the book is sort of really preoccupied with this idea of these sort of almost mythologized women who live these slightly idiosyncratic lives and do these sort of make these wild artistic leaps and do things that many other people haven't really done before. And in doing so, it kind of just really explores this idea of what it means to be creative, to kind of have this life, to live a sort of punk artistic life. And she's quite a difficult character to pin down. There's a lot that's going on in this book that's just a bit wild. I won't pretend I understood all of this book. In fact, there's a lot I probably just probably went over my head. I just liked the energy of it. There's a kind of punk, fun energy to this, but also this sort of dark underbelly with this as well that I thought was really interesting. You don't necessarily need a knowledge of PJ Harvey to appreciate it, although many of the chapter titles or kind of headings are PJ Harvey songs or lyrics. So yeah, just a wild little book, but an interesting one nonetheless. Next up, I read a pamphlet of poetry called Mother Night by Serge Neptune, and I read his last sort of selection of poems, I think either last year or the year before. Time is a weird thing now, called These Queer Merboys. And this, I thought sort of picked up on some of the kind of themes of this, but in a really evolved and interesting way, with a very different focus. And a large part of this book, it's worth noting, talks about some really dark and difficult topics. It talks about a lot about sort of violence, and particularly sort of sexual violence. It talks a lot about not feeling wanted, or kind of not feeling secure in your sort of sense of self or your body or what have you. But there's a real beauty in the way that this is written. It has this kind of fire that burns through it that I found really captivating. It's some of the descriptions of that feeling of, I don't know, going on like a dating app and not having anybody want you, or kind of somebody wanting you, but it's in this very fetishized and intense way. All the kinds of ways that sometimes you just don't feel safe. I think there's a lot in this book that I found really captivating and really interesting, and just this real ferocity of language, coupled with this real tenderness in some of these other poems. I just thought this was really, really beautiful. And next, as part of the Polari Prize, I read 2 of the books that were on the long list. One of them being 40 Lies, which is I was about to try and pronounce the subtitle of this book, but Ipsodixitism, I'm going to go with that. This is a graphic novel by David Shenton, and it has this sort of really intense and kind of busy visual style, But I really loved this. I thought this was clever in so many ways. So it's basically his life story, and so much of his life intersects with these really big pivotal moments in queer history in the UK. So, you know, he talks about going on various pride marches early on. He talks about things like Section 28, about sort of the phenomenon at the time of pretty policemen, where policemen were sent into bars undercover, into gay bars undercover, in the hopes that they'd be picked up, so that when they went to kind of go home together, the police officer would arrest them for kind of indecency or solicitation or whatever. And so this book really details a lot of those moments, but with this very really warm and funny angle on so much of the life then. So, you know, he talks about his initial loves and his parents and their relationships to him and his sexuality and so many other things. But in the meantime, we also get things like knitting patterns, because he's an avid knitter, and you get all of these other things that come up. And it's just this, he is just this wildly creative and exciting and interesting person, but whilst also dealing with so much of kind of queer history. And you get these little moments of like photos in amongst them, and just it really does feel like you know, the story of a life, which is also partly the title, which I only realised right at the end when he very much pointed out, which is 40 Lies is also a jumbling up of life story. And so that's also partly what this is, that this is a big way of kind of putting down so many of the parts of his life. And without spoiling anything, just the sort of later passages of this where he talks about his life now are just so beautiful in so many ways. Yeah, this was just a really heartfelt, gorgeous book. With this, yeah, like I said, really busy and kind of intense style. I'll try and bring it a bit closer so you can see. It's really intense in terms of like, because, you know, some graphic novels have a very clean, stripped back style. And this book is just anything but. It's this very like almost maximalist thing, and I loved it. I thought it was so beautiful, and it really touched me in many ways. In many ways, he's one of the sort of queer elders who whose stories haven't always been told, and so it's kind of, you know, and he was part of, for example, things like some of the safer sex campaigns during the HIV/AIDS crisis, and so there are things that we would have all seen that will have been part of his world, you know, that he helped create, and I think there's something just so brilliant about that. And last but not least, also longlisted for one of the Polari prizes, The Happy Couple by Nisha Dolan, and this is just good fun. This is that kind of sitcom style writing that's just really gorgeous and fun. It's so silly at times, but whilst also dealing with some really important matters. So at the heart of this book are a couple, Luke and Celine. They are in various sort of discussions with each other about whether they should split up or not, and they're sort of in some ways getting ready for a wedding, and all these other things are kind of coming up. Seems like very typical kind of, you know, dramatic point for a story of will they, won't they stay together. But then the book does some quite clever things by really bringing up the past histories of both of these people, and particularly people they've dated in the past and their kind of relationships to those people now. And it's such a kind of wisecracking, funny book. It has that very kind of good Irish sort of writing that I love anyway. You know, it's a book that is well done, but then also just incredibly funny and silly at times, with some absolute corkers of lines. Corkers, that's not the right word. Good lines, with some good lines. Corkers is a bad thing. And it's just really, yeah, I just really enjoyed this. I read this book pretty much in a day, because I started reading it and I was like, oh, this is kind of fun actually. I think when I get home later, I'm gonna just finish reading this book. And I did, and I really loved it. I think it sort of, it plays up this sort of high drama, kind of slightly camp, slightly absurd thing, but also at the heart of it does really look deeply at the kinds of relationships we have with ourselves in terms of our sexuality or our identity or our kind of fears and insecurities. And I think it's all the better for it as well. So yeah, really enjoyed this. And so yeah, these are the books I read this week alongside some Booker books. So it was quite fun to have a bit of a break at times, you know, sort of read a bit of a book, then go and read something else. And considering that much of my reading that's coming up is finishing off this long list and also trying to finish off my shortlist project of reading all the other Booker shortlists from over time. I think I have 48 to go, I think is the current total. I've got a lot more Booker in my future, but I'm really excited to sit and spend a bit of time with some other fun books, and I'll hopefully, in the weekly reads, I'll also try and pepper in some other non-Booker books, mostly for my own sanity as well. Anyway, I've been Bob Booker, talking about these books that I've read this week. Take care and have a grand week. Have a great week. There we go. I can still do words. Take care. See you all soon. Bye-bye.